Hi there. I didn't have like a nice intro card made, didn't really want to make one, didn't have an idea for an intro actually. This is about as unscripted as the rest of the video is. So here I just slapped an old self-portrait on top of the screen while I talk about this. So as of late, I've been extremely inspired by the likes of Prickly Alpaca and Lavender Town. Lavender Town less so. I saw a video of her recently, I hadn't watched her in a long time, where she made designs based on chess pieces. And I was like, oh, that's nice, maybe I should do that in my free time, that's a really cool idea. And then I started watching some Prickly Alpaca videos where she was, you know, doing her regular character design things based on X, based on XY. And I realized that I thought it would be super duper fun to make a video in a similar format to the both of them, where I am doing a character design process video with a recorded voiceover and some nice music. I'm not really making this out of the motivation that it'll go anywhere. I bet I'll post this and then just ghost YouTube again. But I've been looking for something fun to do. And I had the motivation, it just struck me last night, so I decided, fuck it, let's just go ahead and get this done. And so I did. Basically, I literally just jumped right into it, so prepare for potential whiplash. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the video. So, jumping right in, we begin with silhouette blocking to get an idea of the shape language and general silhouette for each chess piece. While these are heavily inspired by the silhouettes of the actual chess pieces, I do end up breaking it in some areas, and you'll see that inconsistency with some of the weapon placements as well. The weapon placements usually are intended to deliver in some way the mechanic of the individual chess piece, which we'll talk about later. So starting with the pawn, obviously, we're looking at very round shapes, we're looking at cascading, and then to offset all of the puffiness and roundness, we have very form-fitting at the bottom. The rook is a tower, the physical piece is literally a building, so we're looking at extremely hulking, large, intimidating shapes, and a very basic composition, standing very tall, perpendicular to the ground as possible. Moving on to the knight, I saw a lot of really interesting designs or interpretations of the knight where it's almost like a centaur type thing, for reasons that will be elaborated on later. I wanted these characters to look as human or humanoid as possible. You'll see here I tried to involve the horse chess piece into her helmet, ended up not liking it. We went with like a very sort of traditional looking knight silhouette. Moving on next, of course, to the bishop, who could mistake that hat. Originally, I was going to try and set her apart from the knight by giving her an extremely curvy figure, and, you know, look at that thigh gap. Obviously, I ended up not doing that, and we're trading it out for, while the knight is very form-fitting, the bishop is not. So we're looking at extremely round and elegant shapes that are filling out the silhouette. And then a few areas of sharpness to sort of deliver on that authority that a bishop usually has in the court. Moving on to the king. The king is very limited in their abilities. So we are looking at a character who has a very basic silhouette, ends up not really having a weapon per se, and more so trying to deliver on political power and elegance that a character like the king would deserve. You'll see that another way we're involving mechanics of the pieces again in the weapons. You can see the bishop has it diagonal across her body to show that, you know, bishops only move diagonally across the board. The queen ended up having an extreme, one of the more dynamic looking poses out of the lineup, at least in this phase. Again, to deliver on, in the piece, the queen piece is a jack of all trades. She can move one, she can move in straight lines, she can move diagonally, there's a lot that she can do. So, trying to deliver on that, filling out her silhouette, trying to deliver on the elegance, she actually ends up changing quite a lot. Moving on to filling out the pawn, so beginning on her, I was thinking that for these characters, by the time I'd gotten to this phase, was to turn them into a party in a D&D setting. So the pawn, the pieces usually take diagonally when they're attacking, so you'll see I include twin rapiers that move in a crisscross behind her to sort of deliver on that. I thought it would make the most sense for her to be a rogue, focused on stealthing and athletics and sleight of hand. I think that pawns are they're a very basic piece. So we're looking at a character who maybe uses how unassuming they look to their advantage, where she is sent to, get into tight spaces. I'd imagine she's very useful in a heist situation. And then obviously it helps that she is skilled, as I had mentioned before, in using weapons, those twin rapiers. Again, to offset the puffiness and fullness of her silhouette, her legs ended up being extremely sort of form-fitting and close to the actual silhouette of her body. So with this character, we're looking at elegance, we're looking at possible sneakiness as well. That is the pawn. Next, moving on to the knight. The knights, I ended up giving her a shield and another rapier, which are as perpendicular to each other as I could get to make that L formation that knights move in the actual game. So I had pictured her in terms of D&D class as being a fighter, where she'd be skilled in the use of multiple different kinds of weapons and would be a very good asset to this D&D team. In terms of her personality, she's the kind of character who she has a very sort of femme fatale energy about her, where she's very, very feminine, but it's in a very sort of like strong and threatening way. Especially with all of these incredibly sharp angles in her shape language, although they are offset by things like the puffy sleeves. She would be very cold and disconnected seeming, where, she doesn't really seem to show a lot of emotion, at least externally. But her actions speak a lot louder than any of that would. Where she would sacrifice herself for sure to protect the people that she cares about. She would never let them come to harm, and would take every last measure, even if it meant sacrificing herself, if it meant that she could keep them safe for even just a little bit longer. So looking at the design itself, I had done a crisscross design where symmetrically she had these really un-three-dimensional looking, almost like insect wing shoulder pads. I ended up moving it to just one side and ended up changing the shape of the shoulder pads so it actually looked like a 3D form that would wrap around a shoulder, which ended up looking a lot better in the end, definitely, than the original plan. With these chess pieces in general, I didn't want to have to make two lineups, and so to sort of make that clear, we end up having a lineup of chess people who have the inclusion of a lot of light and a lot of dark colors sort of along the range. So we're combining a lot of things. Here you can actually see me again adjusting that shoulder pad. I think that she and the pawn would look after each other in particular. I think it isn't too much of a stretch to imagine that maybe she is almost a mentor figure to the pawn, where she is a rogue. Her main focus, again, is on sleight of hand and being sneaky. But I think that if the pawn even one time had asked for training or assistance in using her weapon, the fighter, the knight would definitely, her heart would have skipped a beat at the chance to do that for her. Very compassionate in the way that she acts, and her vocal communication alone is not an indicator of how she truly feels. That comes through in her actions. Next, we move on to the Rook, who actually ended up giving me the most trouble in terms of just his design alone. I'm not completely sold on him yet. I had a lot of trouble with the distribution of his colors, and you'll see me struggle with that as things go on. Anyway, from a D&D perspective, the Rooks move in a completely straight line and are actual buildings. So we're looking at the choice was made to make him extremely bulky and have a very full silhouette. And the weapon I ended up giving him was, while rapiers are a very delicate stabbing sword, he ends up being given a much more rectangle-shaped sword that's perpendicular to the ground, as they, again, move in completely straight lines. In terms of a D&D class, it would make the most sense for his physical build as well, for him to be a barbarian, where maybe he moves sort of very slowly and with purpose, but the moment that he sees his companions getting hurt, or he simply just needs to take care of business when it comes to fighting, he will go into this barbaric rage where he is just an unstoppable monster of destruction. But he does it with a kind heart, whereas barbarians are very much known for their intimidation, their fear factor, how they can get people to do what they want just by first impressions alone. He is that, but it's all a show. And in private, he's actually the maternal figure of the group, where he's making sure everyone is well fed, everyone is hydrated, and he deeply cares for the health, mental and physical, of the people that he's traveling with. And, you know, whatever calamity ended them up in this place, where an entire court has been shrunken down into 5 people, some sort of horrible calamity, like post-apocalyptic sort of calamity, that especially since that has occurred, he's definitely trying to hold his friends close, and in a way hold himself close to his friends. I feel like he feels like he is valuable to them, and feels extremely good in just knowing that they're safe. Next up is the bishop. In terms of her design, to show that purity that religion is associated with, we're working with a lot of very light colors. Also the wealth that these kinds of positions normally carry, so we're having a lot of metal on her design as well, in the form of, you know, linings on her design, the big shoulder pads, the cuffs, her staff. In terms of D&D, she would definitely be a warlock, where since bishops and pastors all claim to be the mouthpieces for a particular god, I think it'd be more interesting if in a very literal sense she is, where the reason she holds the position she does is because she was chosen by the god to be a mouthpiece for the people, in the form of a warlock, a warlock and patron relationship. I'd imagine that while she projects the confidence and people generally liked her before, you know, the kingdom fell, whatever horrible calamity happened that, like, threw the world into ruin. But I imagine in private she's quite shaky and paranoid. And that would probably only increase as this horrible calamity happens, where now it's like she feels like the carpet could be pulled out from under her, but at the same time, her trust in her god has strengthened, as she believes that her continued survival, as well as the continued survival of the rest of the party members, is because of the protection of this god. So in that way, she still remains extremely faithful, and probably sees herself as like a beacon of safety, and so uses that to justify staying with the team, although deep down I don't think she has connections outside of the castle, so she wants to travel with people that are comfortable for her. Moving on to the king now. We're again delivering on wealth. We also have a lot of elegance, very filled out silhouette. I wanted to deliver on the idea that he isn't this hulking, strong figure like the Rook. He's much more of a diplomatic figure, where his connections and ties to other kingdoms and other people would be extremely valuable to the team in terms of, you know, their continued survival in a world that has fallen apart around them so suddenly. So in terms of a D&D class, I think it would make the most sense for him to be an extremely low-level monk, where he can do like martial arts style physical combat, but he needs more so to be protected by his fellow party members, whereas the king piece in chess is extremely weak. They move, you know, one step at a time, in all directions. So the idea that his combat would be extremely limited, I feel like, would make sense as a reference to that fact. He, again, is more valuable for his political knowledge and connections than anything physical about him. He is very, very dignified, and I think that he would have an air of authority and wisdom about him, but the people never feared him. He was and is extremely sort of soft-spoken. He doesn't jump to conclusions. He's not very spontaneous. He likes to think things over, and he has a very sort of strict moral code that I think he would definitely be following, where he believes in justice and loyalty, and above all else, love and the protection of each other in trying times. And he would try and make up for the little that he helps in combat by cooking for them and getting them access to jobs or funds, something of the like, which is the most that he can do. Yeah, that is the king design. Moving on now to the final and most dynamic piece, the queen piece. As stated before, the queen piece is a lot more volatile and versatile than any other piece. Not even arguably, definitely the strongest piece that you have, where they can move diagonally in any direction for as far as you prefer. They can move straight in any direction. So to deliver on that, she has a very dynamic pose, and in terms of a D&D perspective, she would multi-class, where she is a fighter, where she is extremely skilled with multiple kinds of weapons, sword fighting forms, stuff like that. And then she is also a sorcerer. Canonically, sorcerers get their magic from a gift, a bloodline, or exposure to divine energy. The way that I had pictured it was that she was dreaming, and this malevolent sort of god figure appeared before her, and whatever it spoke, or just however it looked, it would have freaked her out quite a bit. And by the end of the dream, this very confusing, mystifying dream, this amulet begins floating towards her, and when she wakes up in the morning, she's clutching that same amulet on her chest. And that amulet would have given her access to magic. And then I'd imagine a few weeks or maybe a few months later is when this horrible rapture happens that tears the entire world apart and changes it forever. And I think she's under the impression that this gift that was given to her, that god that spoke to her, is responsible for what has occurred. And she's definitely paranoid as to why she was chosen to receive this gift out of anyone else, and is definitely paranoid and stressed that this malevolent being could be watching her and her party members' every move. And she's very protective over them, and her husband is a part of that group, so obviously there's going to be sentimentality there and fear there, protective instinct. But she, having to admit that she could potentially be putting everyone in danger is sort of a difficult thing. And I'd imagine that maybe the king knows what occurred, but that them two only know that this had happened, that there was this god involved that could potentially have caused this, horrible, destructive, cataclysmic event. And that they're sort of keeping it under wraps because she has extreme power. She's an incredibly strong addition to their team, and there are tight spots where they required the sorcery gifted by the amulet. But at the same time, they don't want to have to potentially betray or make the other party members feel betrayed or afraid. And so to try and keep that security, they may be sort of keeping the ruse. That's it for the queen. Hi again. Here's the plastered self-portrait again, because we're doing an unscripted outro. I want to thank anyone who watched to the end, in general. This is just like a quick project I wanted to do. In all, before exporting or anything, I think this has probably taken like 5 to 6 hours. I learned a lot about my editing software, Hitfilm, while I did it, though, so I'm glad I did it. I hope that didn't feel like a waste of your time and that you enjoyed it. And if no one sees this, that's fine too, because I enjoyed making this and I can show it to all my friends. So thank you for watching. Bye.